I think it's called love. Winnie the Pooh. Strategy number 4. Speak to one. The room had 3,200 seats. In an hour, a couple thousand people would be filling the room. I stood on stage and did a quick rehearsal of my notes. I wanted to be ready. I wanted to be prepared, and I wanted my nerves to be positive energy and not to bring on an anxiety attack. I envisioned the speech, did my mental exercises, and then walked off the stage and prepared to meet people before the event started. Every time I speak in front of an audience, I remind myself that I am speaking to a person, not to a crowd. Crowds are scary. People are friends. Think of it this way. Throughout history, crowds have rioted, killed, revolted, trampled, and mocked. In crowds, people lose their individual flair and take on a crowd mentality. Some crowds have 10,000 people, others have 100. The size is not what makes a crowd. It's how they react. Google defines a crowd as a large number of people gathered together in a disorganized or unruly way. Crowds are scary. Mike, what are you doing? I'm already nervous and you're making me scared. If you were speaking to a crowd, then you would be right. However, unless you are the president or a revolutionary, then you will never speak to a crowd. No, you are not speaking to a crowd. You are speaking to a person. Right before I stood up to speak to the room with 3,200 seats, I went around and talked to people. I met Georgia. She is a sweet grandmother whose son played for the Seattle Seahawks. Coming from Seattle, I knew who he was, and she was delighted to hear that. I also met Chad. Chad and I spoke for a bit. He was recently single and was trying to figure out the best steps ahead. Tim and Sandy were a smiling couple who held hands while holding hot cups of coffee. They were recently married and had a spark of energy coming off of them. Emily was a teenager who came to hear me speak on the topic of relationships. She was bubbly and a little bit nervous to talk to the speaker. Isaac was fresh out of jail and needed to reboot his view on relationships. He was a bit skeptical and yet was hoping to hear something that would inspire him and give him practical steps to take. All the way up to when the event started, I stood out front and talked to people. I shook their hands. We introduced ourselves. When they discovered that I was a speaker, some were surprised and even nervous that the main speaker was talking to them so casually. I learned a little bit of their stories. They asked for a bit of mine. The crowd dematerialized because I met the individuals that would soon sit next to each other to form a large audience. When I finally stood on stage, I was not speaking to a crowd, nor was I speaking to a large audience. I stood on stage and spoke to Georgia, Chad, Tim, Sandy, Emily, and Isaac. I spoke to my new friends. I wanted to speak to them. I communicated my points to the audience as if I were speaking to those few that I knew. Now, I wasn't speaking into the void. I was speaking into their lives. Speak to all as if you are speaking to one. This is always my strategy.